So for those who may not have been here last week, we had a particularly long service because we had communion and we were saying goodbye to Reverend Frank. And it was a funny thing. I actually didn't have my watch on and really didn't notice the time go by. So I just wanted to mention to you that someone has very kindly put a clock up here so that I'll keep better track of time. Interesting thing was, a good thing I had my watch on today because this one was set 20 minutes fast. So just wondered if there was anything behind that. Anyway, I want you to imagine with me looking out of my front window in the little enclave of Toronto that I used to live in. And on any given morning, I could watch Kathy leaving for her teaching post. I could see Pete heading out to his auto shop. Tina getting into her BMW and going to work. Her husband, Tom, bundling the kids into the van to get them off to daycare before he went to work. There was Paul. He had his own company truck, great big thing. He would climb into that. And then there was Joe. He was retired and he would be tinkering at his lawn and his garden. And many, many times he wore this big gray shirt with a Canada flag on it. And for someone who had grown up in a relatively homogeneous culture, the peoples that I could see out my door was truly amazing. Kathy, she went to Bishop Strachan School when she was younger, which is one of the elite places, and she's probably representative of people who have had several generations in Canada. Tina and Tom, they're Greek. Pete and his wife, they're Greek. I lived in Greektown. In fact, it's no different coming to Belleville. The people next door to me and across the street from me are Greek. Tony, Italian, his wife is Chinese. Paul, Irish. His wife, Karen, English. Joe, who used to wear the big Canada t-shirt all the time. He and his wife, Landy, are from Canton in China. And the thing was, most of us were immigrants. Most of us were immigrants or first-generation Canadians, and we all lived peacefully in this little enclave in the Big Smoke. And from time to time, we might pull out one of our national flags, former national flags, when the World Cup of Soccer was on, and support our countries of origin, but that was all in good fun, and we were good friends and did things together from time to time. Kathy always had a Christmas party for the neighborhood. Joe would come around and give us of the proceeds or the produce of his garden during the summer. Pete, mechanic, he'd look after our cars, and it was quite a wonderful community to be in. But this is Canada. I remember my family arriving in the mid-'70s at the Toronto airport, and it was an early September evening, sun shining still, although it was set. And we all jumped into this 1972 Pontiac Parisienne Safari wagon. It was a beast. For someone who had grown up in Europe with the tiny little cars, it was a beast. And anyway, no time, we were at some friend's house in what's now Brampton. Within an hour or so, we were swimming in a backyard pool. That was the first time I had ever done such a thing. that September, I remember encountering so many 80-plus degree days, blue skies. Like, coming from Ireland, never seen a blue sky, so it was really enjoyable. I was loving it. My mother was trying to get me to school, but I was just enjoying life in this new country. So that was September. October, I got to see leaves change colors I'd never seen before. Got to enjoy my first Thanksgiving. November, late November, it was got some snow, and started to learn to skate, which I'm not really good at. I tried to break into Junior B hockey, but it was a little late for me. Anyway, it was learn to skate. December, I had my first fairly white Christmas. January, let me see, had made a group of friends by that time, one of whom is now my brother-in-law. In February, had my first Canadian Valentine. Let me see, March, I'd seen just about enough snow for one winter. April, I saw the heaviest snowfall I've ever seen in my life. And there was about 20 inches or so came down and drifted into places. And I remember, they used to have these, I'm ad-libbing here. We used to have these things at the end of ditches at the end of people's gardens before the street. And I was out walking after this 20-inch snowfall, which had drifted, with a friend who was also from Ireland. And suddenly, we're walking along, suddenly he just disappears. Just boom, right into one of those things. Anyway, that was April. May, I had a Jamaican friend named Roy, and I was invited to Roy's place for a party. I went along, was game for any party, and was amazed I got quite an education because I was the only white guy there. And that was it. Summer, we just drove and drove and drove. I mean, gas was about 10 cents a liter. And we went down to Washington, visit extended family. We went up to as far as Sault Ste. Marie, and down through Manitoulin Island, took the ferry across Bruce Peninsula, and we began to see some of the beauty of this great nation that we're a part of, and the sheer size of it. And over time, we've really come to appreciate this, I and all my family, and appreciate so many things about Canada, the rich resources, the opportunities this country gives, universal health care, wise bankers, good government, liberty, justice. Canada's not perfect, but it's got so much peace and safety and tolerance. I'm fortunate to call Canada home and to be a citizen of Canada. And I resonate with this fellow Joe, who did a commercial once for a beer company, and he was speaking to Americans, and Joe says, "Hey, I'm not a lumberjack or a fur trader. I don't live in an igloo or eat blubber or own a dog sled. And I don't know Jimmy or Sally or Susie from Canada, although I'm sure they're really, really nice. I have a prime minister, not a president. I speak English and French, not American. And I pronounce it about, not about. And I can proudly sew my country's flag on my backpack. I believe in peacekeeping, not policing. Diversity, not assimilation. And that the beaver is a truly proud and noble animal. A toque is a hat. A Chesterfield is a couch. And it's pronounced Zed, not Z. Zed. Canada is the second largest landmass, the first nation of hockey, the best part of North America. And my name is Joe, and I am Canadian." Do you remember that? So happy Canada Day, everyone. Happy 150, and I trust you're enjoying this weekend. This year is also the 105th anniversary of the Calgary Stampede, also the 25th anniversary of the True North teaching our neighbors to the south how to play baseball. Now, as much as I'm proud to be a citizen of Canada, however, I'm equally honored and privileged to be a citizen of another realm. The tune to that hymn we sang at the beginning of the service, Thaxted, is also the tune for another great hymn called I Vow to Thee My Country. And in the third verse, it talks, and there's another country I've heard of long ago, most dear to them that love her, most great to them that know. Refers to the kingdom of God. And the Apostle Paul speaks in this passage that we read together today, he speaks to Christians or of Christians as fellow citizens with saints and members of the household of God. Now, Paul, he had been a Jew, and he had been a Jew from birth, and he functioned within the Jewish setting. People in that setting believed that they were the chosen nation of God, and they viewed Gentiles, that is, people who aren't Jews, that's the rest of us, they viewed them as foreigners, or some Bibles which are produced in the States will call them aliens, that's their word. Religious purity laws in Judea. They prohibited Jews from hanging around with Gentiles, doing certain things with them. Pious Jews wouldn't eat with Gentiles, for instance, lest they became defiled. The Gentiles you were to be separated from them because they're disconnected with God, they're not part of God's people. And yet Paul says in this passage, with Christ, all that changed. Whereas Gentiles had been dead in their sins, strangers to the covenant of promise. Now, because of Christ and because of the cross, they're all drawn together with Jews to be one people of God. No longer is there division between Jew and Greek. No longer are they aliens, the Gentiles. They have this high honor of being citizens of God's kingdom. Now, as much as I remember the time when I came to this great country, I remember too the time when I entered the Christian fold. And I was about 20 years old and wasn't pleased with direction in life. And over the course of about a year of searching, I determined that I was going to follow God. It wasn't an easy choice, and sometimes life has been a little challenging because of that choice. Since then. But I remember, for instance, in those first few months, some of my friends just rolling their eyes with me going to church. I remember they didn't really understand why I'd go to bed a little earlier on Saturday night so that I could go to church. They wanted me to go out and go out in the town. They didn't quite get it when a store clerk would hand me more change than I needed, and I'd give them the money back, because there was something else driving my life. It had changed. Things had changed. I had a new guide. I was a citizen of another kingdom. So being Christian, it brought some changes, and being Christian hasn't always been easy. Now, I know in Canada we don't have to worry too much about persecution. The type that's going on in some parts of the world. Being Christian isn't like that. But being Christian today isn't like what it was, say, in the 1950s, when to be a Christian was just to be a good Canadian. To go to church was to be a good Canadian. We've had this secularization process that's gone on since probably the 50s, and that means that Christianity is now a little different than the common culture, and its standards are a little different. And Canada, however, for all its tolerance, I wondered at times if it has a bit of a blind spot toward Christianity. We've been through years now in which, for instance, Christmas symbols or Easter symbols have not been welcomed in some places because they might offend somebody. And there are stereotypes out there of Christian leaders, for instance. There's some they will revolve around this idea that the person is so spiritually minded they're no earthly good. For others, they'll revolve around the whole concept of a television evangelist and what's going on there. Comedian Dana Carvey, while incredibly funny, didn't do us any favors with the church lady thing. Christianity, that once had this very strong role in our society, has become the butt of humor, and it's not welcomed and in some places, and it's viewed as irrelevant in some places. I've wondered, however, if the most strong opposition to Christianity has been felt sometimes within the political realm. A few years ago now, but I remember when Paul Martin was the Prime Minister, Paul Martin was forced to declare that his Christian Catholic faith would not interfere in his ability to run the country, despite the fact that many prime ministers before him had been Christian. It was a couple of years before that when Stockwell Day was the leader of the opposition. He really took it on the chin for his faith. Now, whether or not you agree with his faith or not, or his theology, it was astonishing. The relentless attacks during a campaign. Jean Chrétien scored political points by saying that being prime minister is more than just photo ops. It's a full-time job, even on Sunday. He was taking a shot at the fact that Day wouldn't campaign on a Sunday. And then it got worse with MP Hetty Fry. She portrayed an ignorance of all religious beliefs in telling a rally that when Day said that Jesus Christ is the God of the whole universe, I say that's an insult to every Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, everybody else who believes in other religions. Now, that sounds good, what she said. But does it matter that Muslims believe that Allah is the God of the whole universe? I don't recall any MP ever taking on other religions for theological beliefs or positions. That would be bigotry. But with Christians, fair game. And so it's a little tricky being a Christian in these days. There may not be persecution, but there are these negative vibes that come up from time to time. I remember I ran a conference in Toronto last September, the tail end of September. Paul Henderson, who scored the big goal, it was actually before I came to Canada, so I was totally unaware of it until the mid-'70s. But I learned. But Paul Henderson scored that big goal in the 72 Summit Series. And we had him kick off this conference that we ran called Being Christian 2016. And in his talk, he spoke of how becoming a Christian, he didn't engage persecution, but he said he got a lot of ribbing from the other guys in the hockey community. And it was difficult. So it is a little tricky being a Christian. And it gets a little difficult to say, I'm a Canadian, and I am a Christian. I remember a colleague in ministry confessed one time to me that he had difficulty actually telling people that he was a Christian, never mind a clergyman. But one wonders if we should expect anything else. After all, both Jesus and Paul, they spoke about an otherworldly aspect of the gospel, that it was a little different. And they differentiate between the spirit of this world and the spirit that's from God, the spirit of truth whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him or knows him. And Jesus says, if the world hates you, it's hated me before you. You're citizens of another realm, says Paul. And Jesus told Christians these things, his disciples these things, to warn them, to stop them from falling away. He says, you are different. You will be different. And even in Canada, culture that's tolerant can be a little difficult, a little tricky. So what should we do? Well, I wonder if we should just keep on keeping on. If we should just keep on following Christ. And I wonder if we should think maybe a little bit about the suffering of Christ. Do we get to share a bit of that? Maybe think about the cross. Think about the resurrection. And when we begin to count our blessings, the blessings of what it is to follow Christ and the blessings that it is to be a citizen of God's kingdom, we need to keep our eyes on the prize, as Paul says, that which is to come. And no matter what the world throws at us, keep going. And stand for Jesus. And so on this Canada Day weekend, let's stand for Canada. Let's be good citizens. But even more, count it an honor and a privilege to stand for Christ. And as Paul says, be not ashamed of the gospel.